That's for the way. All right. So you guys can see what I can see.
Yes, we can.
All right. That's the good news. The bad news is it's not in the right screen. Here's a backwards preview. All right. Here we go. So yeah. So I saw that you guys created the title "Music and Art in Spain," so that's what I used, and you only created it because I never got you one. So here it is. All right. So first, I'm going to talk about the architecture in Valencia. Valencia is a medieval city. It's actually a Roman city. It was called Valentia, settled by the Romans. And just north of there in Sagunto was a big penal colony actually for them. It was kind of like their version of Australia for the British way back when. So I'm starting off with a couple of famous buildings from the medieval era. This was the Silk Exchange. Valencia was one of the main textile centers in the Mediterranean area. Valencia, if you don't know, you'll see a map a little bit later, but it's right on the Mediterranean, straight south from Barcelona and straight east from Madrid. And so it was a major, like I said, a textile center back at that time. And so from the outside, it doesn't look too terribly fancy or anything like that. It does look kind of medieval with the turrets and whatnot, but inside it looks like this, which is pretty nice. And it's pretty massive. So this was built as like the Silk Exchange. This was just their normal way of building business buildings back in the day. But the scope of the way it is, you can tell how important this must have been. I mean, this is, they do this kind of architecture in cathedrals and in palaces for the rich and famous. So it had to be a pretty booming thing for that. The other major medieval structure is the cathedral here. You see part of it, it's kind of tucked away in modern day streets and stuff like that. There's a famous tower there on the left called the Michelet Tower. And here's a view of it from the backside, which curiously has a big Star of David in the middle of the Rosetta there. And this is a view on the inside. And it's a better view of some of the color of that. So it's really quite nice. It doesn't rank among the the most famous ones in Spain. It's more of a smaller kind of tucked away kind of thing, but it's still a nice thing. So then in the mid 1800s, there was kind of the big building boom in Valencia. And this is the train station there. And all these buildings are looking pretty nicely made up. When I lived there back in the 90s, they were still kind of grungy and dirty and hadn't kind of fixed them up. And that kind of happened at the end of the section about architecture, where you see all the modern stuff. That started bringing tourists to Valencia in droves, and then they started fixing up the really old stuff. Because up to the time that they said, yeah, it's here, but we've always had it, and it wasn't that big of a deal. But now it's become an enhanced part of the big tourism that is happening in Valencia, which it didn't used to be on the big tourist spot in Spain, and now it has become. So, one interesting to show you here, which I think you'll see on this next slide, is Valencia is famous, in addition for paella, it's also famous for the oranges, the famous Valencia oranges. But actually in Valencia, they have lots of different varieties of oranges, and the people I knew who had orange groves out there, they said their favorite eating orange is called the California. So go figure. And that's also where the clementines first hit our country from the Valencia area. Now they're grown in California and all over the world, but when they first started coming to the States, they were all coming from Valencia. That was pretty cool for me because I had lived there. So you'll notice, it's hard to tell, but if you see, do you see my cursor when I move it?
Yep.
Okay, it's hard to see here, but they actually have little bunches of oranges that are decorated as part of all this in there. So it's a big part of their industry. And that's on the inside. Also in that time period, and it shares the same plaza. It's just back around to the right behind this thing is where the train station is. So this is built right adjacent to it. It's pretty when it's all lit up like this. The bullfighting in Spain is very regional. They have parts of Spain like Barcelona where they've outlawed it, and then you have other parts of Spain where it's still hugely popular, and like in the south of Spain and even in the north parts of Spain. Valencia is kind of mixed a lot of different ways actually, but there are some people that don't dig it and some people who do. When we talk about the music part, up until they built the more modern concert halls, all the band competitions that have been happening there for 130 years or so used to take place here in the bull rings, and so they wouldn't be able to start their competitions usually till around 10 or 11 o'clock in the evening, because it was like 120 degrees outside or something like that. So they'd start around 10 or 11 in the evening, and they'd end around 3 or 4 in the morning, and then people would have to get up and go to work the next day because these are all amateur bands with people working. This is a neat little thing not too far from the cathedral in the middle of the old part of the city. It's called the Round Plaza, and it's a completely round plaza, and it's got on the main floor, it's got all sorts of shops and stuff like that, and the second floor are residences. But they've done this up nicely in recent times, so it looks pretty nice. It's kind of a little tucked away little gem that I kind of like. Around the end of the 1800s and the early 1900s, in France, you had a style called Art Nouveau. And in Spain, in parts of Spain, primarily Barcelona and also Valencia, their style called modernism that started. And it was similar in some ways to Art Nouveau, but it was called that slightly different iteration here. So this is the main market, the central market, located right, well, there's another market that you'll see in a minute, but this is kind of a nice one. And so before supermarkets, this is the place where people would go to buy everything. You'd have the little mom and pop shops too, but this is the big place so that if you live close enough, you can go get stuff here more directly. This is kind of a panoramic view shot of it. And it's still being used as a market today and is very heavily trafficked and stuff like that. And well, I don't know what's happening during COVID now, especially since Spain is being slammed for a second time. But traditionally, yeah, that's how it is there. And then in another corner of the downtown area is the Cologne market, the Columbus market. And it's got really pretty facades on there. And it was used as a market, and then it was kind of abandoned. And then I don't know when it was refurbished. I'd say maybe the last 10 or 20 years they refurbished it. And now it's kind of like a mall. They got restaurants and small shops and all stuff in there. But the architecture is really pretty, and they've done a nice job of restoring it. So yeah, that's how it kind of looks with the kind of little booths and stuff like that. And then there's like a 4 or 5 star restaurant in the basement level of that I've gotten to eat a couple times. Really nice. Okay, and then you come to the next major era of building in Valencia, and that was starting in the 1990s and 2000s. They wanted to make they were kind of riding the economic boom that had been happening, and they wanted to make a big visual statement. And so they hired architects Salvador Calatrava, and he did a lot of the planning of most of these buildings and some other architects as well. So this is a huge complex to the southeast of the city in a part that had not been developed at all. It sits alongside what used to be the riverbed, that formed a protective barrier around the city of Valencia, kind of circled it on 2 or 3 sides. And the old part of the city was built on the inside of that, but every 50 years or so, they would get monumental floods that would wipe out the city. So back in the 1950s, where that river enters Valencia, they actually built a bypass for the river to go straight out into the Mediterranean. And like 99% of the time, it's completely dry. But when it rains hard after not being wet, then that water just runs. So it hasn't flooded since then, and it won't. And they've converted all those riverbeds, that old riverbed, into a series of parks. And starting in, I think, the 1980s, they built the original concert hall there, which is where a lot of the band competitions take place now. That was built not too long before I got there in '93. And then past that, further on the outskirts, is where they constructed this very modern looking complex of buildings. So this is an aerial overview. This is another view of several of the buildings here, which I'll show in a second. So it's a pretty futuristic kind of looking place. This building here is called the Hemispheric. It's their planetarium and IMAX theater. And it looks like there's a little bubble perking out of the water there. Behind it, to your left, you see the arts. They call it the Arts Palace complex. There's another view of those 2 structures from the other side of that. So part of the lighting is the sky, but they've also integrated a lot of lighting within the structures themselves and on the roads. And this is that with the Science Museum behind it. So this whole new complex is called the City of Arts and Sciences. And so there's a lot of art stuff. There's an opera house, there's a concert hall, there's a science museum, there's an aquarium, there's the IMAX theater, there's kind of a multi-purpose, kind of sheltered outdoor concert / exhibition kind of building. This is the Science Museum, named after the Prince Felipe, who is now the King of Spain. And they've just run his father out of the country because he's been apparently squandering a lot of money and having affairs with, someone's chronicled almost 500 women who've been tracking him. So there's a lot of scandal with that in the royal family. But Felipe's been pretty clean nose so far that we know of. This is the arts complex called the Queen Sofia Palau de las Arts, Palace of the Arts. Quite a bit different than the earlier styles, huh? This is the aquarium. Pretty cool. And you can see other buildings right behind it too. So they're all in succession right after each other. This is the parking garage. Pretty nice parking garage. So the parking stuff is on the bottom, and then they made this nice walk place on top. And here it is lit up at night.
Wow.
This is one of the more recent additions to the complex. One of the bridges there, but it maintains the kind of swooping modern kind of look to it. This is like a big sail. This is not far from the Mediterranean Sea. You're just talking probably half a mile or so from there. So I'm guessing that's kind of ties in the modern with their environment here. This is the concert exhibit hall there called the Agora. All right, so that's kind of my architectural overview from older to newer stuff in Valencia. Valencia is the third largest city in Spain. Madrid is first, population-wise. Barcelona is second, and Valencia is third. I think Seville is fourth for that. So what I've done my professional research on ever since I've been doing it has been on the community band movement in Spain, primarily in Valencia. And it actually is more than the community bands there. They also have one of the few remaining military bands, and they've got one of the top full-time professional bands, kind of like a professional orchestra we have in this country. They have those in Spain as well. But before they had those, they had professional community bands. And this one was founded, I think, right at the beginning of the 1900s. It's a full-time professional band. The musicians are making salaries, pretty close to what you'd get in a major symphony in this country. It's funded by the city. And they have them in Madrid, Barcelona, Valencia, Bilbao. Those are the main ones. And they have several others that are full-time professionals. And they have other ones that are kind of more kind of semi-professional, but these musicians are fantastic. A lot of them are composers also. A lot of them are band conductors also. And if you notice the front picture, you'll notice a whole bunch of cellos in there. That's a very typical thing in Spain, especially in Valencia. That's not typical pretty much anywhere else in the world where they've got string instruments within the band. It's not too uncommon to maybe see a string bass, but you rarely see cellos. So that's interesting iteration, and that's pretty endemic of all the bands in the Valencia region, whether or not they're the military band or a professional band like this or the community bands. So here's a little map of Spain, and those are the three provinces. So Valencia exists as a city. It exists as that central province in red or pink there. And then it's also the capital for the three provinces there. So it exists as a municipality, as a provincial government, and as a regional government. All those other divisions you see in Spain are what they called communities, or kind of autonomous regions, similar to our states. That was put into place. The structure was after the dictator Francisco Franco died back in 1975. And when that happened, all the different regions started to be able to kind of open up their regional idiosyncrasies and specialties, and the bands in Valencia are the cultural icon. There's 554 community band clubs in that little area, which is about the size of New Jersey. So those are three kinds of bands that are there. The community bands go back to right after Napoleon. The basic theory is that when Napoleon marched through, when Napoleon took over in France, one of the first things they did is they organized these mass concerts. They had choirs because music had been reserved for the rich and famous only, the powerful. And those were the only people who got really training. So to bring the music and the arts to the populace was one of the ways when the French Revolution was still trying to promote democracy before Napoleon kind of got power hungry and went that direction. But initially they were putting democracy in place. And so they had these mass concerts of thousands of people, and they got people with instruments. So they had these mass bands things too. And then he got power hungry and territory hungry, and he started marching all over Europe, and he would take his bands with him. And so the thinking is that they marched through Spain and with all these, and in parts of Spain, especially Valencia, it seemed to stick. And so there are bands that go back to the early 1800s down there that are over 200 years old now, these community band clubs. And right after the fall,
Scott,
yes.
just a quick question. I'm just curious. That's a lot of community bands. I'm assuming you got, I don't know, 100 people in a band, maybe a community band or something like that. Are kids, like, is it like music, kind of like English and math? You just get it from a very young age all the way through and expected to participate?
There's a lot of questions in there. So traditionally, back 200 years ago and 100 years ago, and maybe even 75 years ago, and where maybe even 50 years ago, it was mostly a male thing. And it was mostly like the grandpa handing his instrument down to his grandson, with the dad still playing in the band. And if you lived in a little village somewhere, there was probably a band, and if your family belonged, you were expected to be in the band. And then as times become more modern, they started allowing girls and women to join the groups. And in a lot of places today, they constitute more than half of the people in there. But yeah, it's a very strong tradition. It exists outside of the school system.
Oh, wow.
Okay, almost everybody everywhere in the world it does. I think the only places where band is part of the school system are here in Australia and maybe England. I'm not sure if they're still in the school system there, if they're outside of school. I don't remember.
I didn't realize that.
England has another band iteration, the brass band, which they were tied to, and their brass instruments exclusively, and they are typically tied to industrial companies, foundries, and all sorts of stuff like that. And it was a time where they would build camaraderie in these smaller communities.
Kind of like a bowling team or something?
I guess. But there's a huge brass band culture which they exported to a lot of their colonies later on, and they still have major competitions, and the players in those could be pretty amazing. So students, traditionally, you would get taught by the older kids or some of the older musicians. And then if any of them became professionals, then they would probably set up a shop. And then there's a conservatory system which exists in Spain. They've got different levels of conservatories where they teach just music, and they have a lower level for younger kids and a medium level for like high school kids, and then they have what they call the superior level, the professional level. And so kids that are interested in pursuing music would do their regular school stuff during the day, and then after school they would do their whole musical training. And in Spain, the school day typically is just in the morning up until lunchtime, but lunchtime is late, so they go to school from 7 or 8 until probably 2-ish, and then they're done. And then the lunchtime is from like 2 to 4 in Spain. So then after 4 o'clock, you would go and have your music lessons and stuff like that until dinner time, which is around 8 or 9 o'clock. And then at 10 o'clock, you come back and you do your band rehearsals from 10 until midnight. And so you have this whole school part of your day, and then you have this whole music part of your day if you're doing music. And a lot of people are. In more recent years, they've been trying to pass a law to integrate music more into the public school system and to get financing to have all the musical clubs that were teaching kind of just on their own to be kind of professionally certified and have credit towards that. So it's become a lot more institutionalized and structured over the time. So that's a long answer to your short question, but it had lots of parts to it.
Gotcha. Thank you.
So after Franco died and all this openness happened, all the bands were going around trying to get money to do things, and this band federation was organized to help lobby on behalf of all these little individual clubs all over the region. And they they still are a huge political force because they represent 500, that's now over 550 musical societies, which are the names of their clubs. They have now their training systems are now officially schools. They have 60,000 students, 4,000 teachers, 45,000 people, and 200,000 in an area that's less than 1 million. So it's well, that's not true. The whole area's got more than 1 million, but it's still a significant chunk of people. And they're actually a pretty significant contributor. I had a slide that I deleted from this show that talked about it was in the top 100 of the largest economic institutions in Valencia. The whole band movement was. So it's important in a lot of different ways. All right, Denise, this is where I'm going to play a little video clip. See if it works. I'm going up to the top. Can you hear anything?
Got it.
So the Valencia Band Federation, I've been engaged with them ever since I was there back 25 years ago. And when they do presentations in this country, I help them do that, or in other countries, and I'm usually a translator for them and have collaborated with them a lot. So they put together this presentation about what the Valencia band world is, and I thought it's like 5 minutes. I thought it'd be an interesting plug here.
Valencia is a great city for tourism. Besides the beautiful architecture and the landscapes, there's also fantastic food and a beautiful city to explore.
Wow, Valencia, really honestly, it's been amazing. It's got everything. It's got amazing architecture. It has the sun, it's always sunny, and I'd say the best part is it has mountains and the sea. I mean, it's unbelievable. I've never been to a city that has everything that you're looking for. It's great. Valencia actually is really interesting with things to see, the touristy things you want to see. For example, when I got into the station, it was modernist, the style of architecture. So when I walked out of the train, it had all these oranges and it was super ornate, which I've never seen before. And then another day we went to the center of the city and we went to the Lonja, which was this silk market from the Gothic style. So the architecture was completely different. So you can see all these different styles of architecture from super old to super new. And then we went to this big square with this beautiful statue. I mean, there's so many touristy things to see. It's really cool.
The thing I like the most about Valencia is the people, the international community, and the great musicians that live here. I definitely think Valencia is a very welcoming city. Especially as a non-Spanish speaker, I've felt welcomed here from the very first day.
Honestly, I was nervous to meet the musicians. I mean, were they going to be friendly? Were they going to be helpful? Could they speak English? And the answer is yes. They were super friendly, helpful.
Whoops. Rats. I was just going to comment that guy that we're just showing was a friend of mine, Adrian Ronda, who I brought to Big Rapids twice to do concerts with us. So, all right, so there he is. Okay. So.
Father, everybody, it was all playing at the same time in the same concert. Well, we did play music. They also was super social. It was great. What song we were about to play, they would help me out immediately. So super helpful. I was immediately part of the band. It was great. The level was quite high, really, it was great. Aside from the high level of music, they also was super social. I mean, in the concert that I got to play in, there was a mother, a daughter, a son, a father, everybody. It was all playing at the same time in the same concert. Well, we did play some classical pieces that I had played before in the US, but we did play some traditional pieces from this area. So we played a zarzuela, which is like a Spanish opera, and we also played a pasodoble, which is super traditional here in Valencia.
The people here have received me in a very friendly way, and as being a musician, I've made lots of friends playing gigs in different venues around town. Yeah, since coming here, I've been able to participate in many different festivals around the Valencian community, marching in bands and just soaking up the way that the Spanish are celebrating their heritage.
you. This
Nice to meet you.
is very exciting.
Okay, you
Nice
are?
to meet you, Brian.
Brian, okay, Brian.
It was great. His conducting style, I was able to follow him really well. I really did feel like part of the band. And then it was at the end of the concert, he had us stand up in front of everybody. The whole audience was applauding, and it was awesome. It was exciting. It was really fantastic.
I would recommend this experience to any American that wants to play music around the world. Valencia is a great city, and I would do this again anytime.
This experience has been awesome. I love all the touristy stuff about Valencia, but really the most special part was being a part of the band, playing in the concert, walking down the street. I mean, I really felt like I was part of Valencia, and that is super special and super exciting. I 100% recommend this to anybody who plays an instrument. It's fantastic.
Why they chose to use Russian music for the soundtrack, I don't know, but it's good. All right. And then the last part here, I'll finish up with just a little bit about paella. And so Valencia's up here, the big city, and then just south of here is the big lagoon called the Albufera. And this green area around here, this is where all the rice is grown. So all these rice dishes happen because of this geographic situation here. That's what it looks like. It's from satellite. So here's the city up here, and there's the big lagoon area here, the Albufera, and around there is that. And then once you get out toward the mountains are, this is where all the oranges start growing, all the way around the Valencia area. And then to a little to the west, you have the vineyards where you can have some really good wines. You got oranges, you got rice, you got wine, you got sun, you got beaches, you got mountains. You got music. It's like she said, pretty cool. This is a traditional old house. There's not many of these left, but it's a beautiful example here. Here's a picture of the lagoon, another one at night. These are some of the rice fields. And these are the paellas. This is the traditional one, which is made traditional with what the people of Valencia call Valencia paella, made with chicken and rabbit meat, sometimes sprinkled with snails, lima beans, and flat green beans. This is probably more famous in this country. It's also famous there. This is the second most popular one there. So basically, if you lived along the sea, you'd do this more often with whatever leftover seafood you had. If you lived more in the interior, you're more of a farmer, kind of stuff that, then you would just get whatever animals are out there and chop them up, put it in the rice, and make paella. Traditionally, it's made over a big wood. That's a fairly good size pan there. You can see a lot of probably chicken and rabbit meat being started in there. Oh yeah, I forgot this little short video here. So manipulating the wood is always the challenge when you're doing these. I used to do them this way and then I got tired of it. So I use the ones now. That's a little bit bigger one. Oof. Here's a bigger one.
Oh.
The serving spoon is a crane.
That's awesome.
That's incredible.
One pan that'll feed 100,000 people. All right. That's my show.
Well, that was great. It just reminded us, because on our Vocalerica trip to Spain this year, we would have, one of the events was going to be paella making. So.
Oh, don't even talk about that trip.
Yeah.
So.
I was intrigued when you talked about the brass band competitions in England. I grew up in the South and I don't remember that, but in the North, where I visit some of my relatives, I've seen those brass bands. They march through the villages and they are fantastic.
Yep.
But I was intrigued when you said maybe it was tied to the industry because, you know, around that area, it was a lot of the industrial area. So, but they are amazing.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, and I don't know how they are, if they're still tied to those industries today, but they came out of that tradition. You had a lot of the coal miners had their bands. And we had that tradition in this country back in the 1800s. We had bands that were tied to industries. We had bands that were all the different ethnic groups that came in. There were American Indian bands, there were Czechoslovakian bands, German bands, Italian bands, Polish bands, all these kinds of things. Up until around the end of World War I, and after that time, and especially after World War II, the whole community band movement in our country shifted into school bands. And so that's been the main focus in this country. Although there are still a number of community bands around, but the proportion has flip-flopped in our country.
Yeah, very interesting. As your big part of your big audience, I'd just like to really thank you. It was fascinating. I really enjoyed it.
Well, Scott, I've heard you talk about paella before, but I've never heard you talk about music and architecture. So I was really glad to see the pictures that you've shared and to hear you talk about that. So I'm glad that I got to be a part of it too.